Hey, sis, welcome back to the Candid Sister Podcast. And I want to begin today in a very simple way. This is not a restart, this is a maturing. This podcast is now coming back because I needed to create something brand new. It is coming back because I now have greater clarity about what this space was always becoming. For those of you who have been with me from the beginning, you know this podcast started from a very real place. It started from the need to use my voice in a more honest, more conversational, and more human way. It was a place where I could tell the truth about what it took to build, what it cost to lead, and what was happening behind the company, behind the vision, and behind the woman. And over time, many of you connected with that, not because everything was polished, but because it was honest. The life interrupted. We took a 6 month hiatus, and during that time, there was grief, there was loss, there was space, and there was a real need to step back and recoup. So, before I say anything else, I want to acknowledge that this return is not casual for me. It is thoughtful, it is intentional, and it comes with a deeper understanding of what this podcast is actually meant to do. This season is not about returning louder, it's about returning clearer. When this podcast first began, it gave people the opportunity to get to know my story. It gave me space to speak openly about the emotional, spiritual, and physical realities that shaped my journey as a CEO and founder. But here's what I came to understand with greater maturity: those stories were never just stories, they were signals, they were patterns, they were evidence. What I was living through personally was also teaching me something professionally. What I was experiencing emotionally was affecting how I was carrying leadership operationally. And what felt private at the time was actually shaping how I built, how I decided, how I endured, and how I governed. That realization changed the way I see this podcast. Because now I understand that this space is not only here for storytelling, it is here for interpretation. It is here to help women in business understand what may really be happening underneath the pressure they are carrying. It is here to put language to what many founders and CEOs are feeling that have not yet named clearly. And it is here to serve as a more intentional media arm for Phoenix International. Not in a way that feels cold or corporate, but in a way that is aligned, useful, and mature. The strategy already frames the show as a thought leadership engine, educational gateway, and leadership recalibration space, which is the right evolution for this next season. So, no, this is not me becoming someone else. This is me becoming more precise about my assignment. I think part of my maturity as a leader is being able to look back and understand your earlier work differently, right? Season one was relational, it was candid, it was vulnerable, it was personal. And I do not dishonor that at all. In fact, I believe that season did exactly what it needed to do. It built trust. It let people hear the woman behind the company. It created connection before structure, and that mattered to me. But now I can see that what many listeners heard as my story was actually the beginning of a much deeper leadership conversation. Because when I look back now, I do not just see pain, I see formation. I do not just see pressure, I see patterns, and I don't just see emotional moments, I see leadership lessons. That is why this next chapter matters to me. I'm not returning to tell a disconnected story. I'm returning to help interpret what the story revealed. And what it revealed is that many women are not simply tired because they're doing too much. Many are carrying businesses whose growth has outpaced their structure, making decisions while depleted, holding on to things emotionally that are showing up operationally in your business, and truly trying to solve workflow issues that are actually revealing deeper strains in leadership, identity, or governance. The truth is that kind of strain does not always announce itself loudly. Like you don't really kind of like recognize it like you was like it's as if you was driving on the road and you see the road in front of you. Sometimes it hides behind your competence, your faithfulness, your ambition, and even behind your success. That is one of the reasons Phoenix exists. The public positioning of the company already says that growth is not the problem. Misaligned growth is. It also says that founders often begin carrying operational weight their architecture should be holding. The language is not theoretical for me, it was lived. I also want to say this very clearly. This is not a niche conversation. This is not just me reflecting on a personal reason or season in my life. This is leadership reality affecting women at meaningful scales. Gallup reported in March 2026 that women in leadership roles reported burnt out at an average rate of 29%. 29% from 2022 through 2025. We talk about 3 years of consistent reported burnout that averaged at 29%. Now, 29% may not be much in numbering, but when you amass that number to how many women that are in business, there are more than 14 million businesses owned by women, and just 29% of that, these women experience burnout in their leadership roles. That's a lot. And you compared it with 19% for the men in those same roles, we found out that it's nearly a third of full-time employed women say they very often or always feel burnt out at work, or they're the same percentage of amount for those women who actually feel the same burnt out in owning a company. So when I say that women can be carrying more than their structure is built to hold, I'm not speaking into a vacuum. There is measurable strain. And what concerns me is that many high capacity women keep functioning inside that strain for so long that it begins to feel normal. You get into a certain survival mode in which you live your life in, not in a true reality of true success, I guess, without survival. They stay productive, they stay responsible, they stay committed. But under the surface, something is being eroded. Clarity starts weakening, decision making starts getting heavier, peace start disappearing, operations start becoming more fragile, and the founder starts carrying weight that should have already been translated into structure, systems, boundaries, or even just governance. That is the conversation I want to have here now. Not just how to keep going, but how to govern growth well. Not just how to stay inspired, but how to stay aligned. Not just how to tell the story, but how to discern what the story is teaching. And that is the maturity of this next season. So let me tell you plain what this podcast is becoming. This podcast is becoming a more disciplined space for leadership recalibration. It is becoming a place where we can talk about leadership strain, operational healing, governance, emotional and structural alignment, sustainable capacity, business maturity, and the deeper realities that affect how a company is built and carried. That direction is already embedded in the strategy for this next season, especially the framing of the show around operational healing, kingdom governance, founder capacity, and sustainable systems. It will still be warm and it will still be candid and it will still sound like me, but it will also be more intentional. There will be greater substance, greater discipline, greater clarity, and a stronger connection between this podcast and the larger thought leadership of Phoenix International. Because I do not want this show to simply be a place where people say, wow, that was relatable. I want it to be a place where women can say, I finally understand what may be happening in my leadership. I finally have language of what my business is carrying. Oh my God, I finally see what I thought was only exhaustion may also be misalignment. And finally, I understand why growth started heavier, feeling heavier than it used to be. That is a different level of usefulness. And that is the level I believe this is the season that it's time to carry. So here's what I want you to understand as we begin this relaunch. Season one was not a mistake. It was not immature in a negative sense. It was not something I needed to distance myself from. It was foundational. I built relational trust. Now that trust can carry greater weight, what began as candid storytelling is now maturing into leadership interpretation. What began as survival testimony is now becoming leadership revelation. And that matters because in my own journey, emotional healing directly affected business operational healing. I want to say that again. In my own journey, emotional healing directly affected business operational healing. That is one of the deepest truths underneath this season. It means your internal life and your leadership life are not as separate as you may think. It means the unseen conditions of the leader can shape the visible conditions of the business. In turn, some companies are not only facing process issues, they are facing the accumulated weight of what the leader has been carrying silently. And if that is true, then this podcast has to do more than inspire. It has to help interpret, it has to help diagnose, and it's has to help guide women toward greater order. That is where we are going. So if you have been wondering whether this is still the Candid Sister podcast, yes, it is. But it's returning with greater clarity about what this voice is here to do. This is not a restart, it is a maturing. And over these next episodes, I'm going to walk you through the bridge between story and strategy, between healing and leadership, between what I live and what it reveals. We're going to talk about what happens when your internal strain starts shaping your business. We're going to talk about what I now mean by business soul care. We're going to talk about what operational healing really looks like when you're leading something real. So stay with me. Don't just listen to one episode in isolation. Walk this season with me in order. And if you know this is the kind of conversation you need in this season of business, join the email list. Stay connected to the Phoenix ecosystem and make sure you are close enough to receive the next layer as it unfolds. Phoenix's public positioning already centers governance, structure, stewardship, and assessing readiness before expansion. So that is the right ecosystem context for this show to reinforce. Thank you for being here. Thank you for returning with me. And thank you for allowing this space to grow with me. And as always, stay fearless, stay fabulous, stay focused. We'll see you in the next episode.